their portfolio and talk about some of the changes towards sustainability that they are making. I don't know exactly who our speaker is yet. We've been playing phone tag back and forth, but they did let me know that they could do our next meeting. So with that, Jillian, who is our Vice President, is going to introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you so much to Dr. Mike Shambaugh-Miller for being here with us today. Dr. Shambaugh-Miller is the Executive Director of Produce from the Heart, the only Nebraska-based nonprofit dedicated to rescuing fresh farm produce and moving it from farm or farmers markets to food banks, homeless shelters, at-risk population meal distribution sites, and food pantries. Dr. Shambaugh-Miller will present briefly on the difference between food loss and food waste, and then we'll discuss the impact of the COVID pandemic upon food loss and food waste in general, and its impact upon the operation of his food rescue program. Thank you so much, Dr. Mike Shambaugh-Miller, and looking forward to your program. It's always a delight to have you. Go ahead.
It's always nice to see you, Jillian, and it's nice to see others that I recognize the names on the screen. If you have any questions while I'm talking, just feel free to jump right in. There's not that many of us, so it won't be that big of an issue. It's not like the last few semesters here at the university where I'm trying to wrangle 187 students on Zoom. So this is just a piece of cake. This one's enjoyable. I can actually almost see everyone on one screen, which is great. But I won't insist that you turn your cameras on so I know that you're actually paying attention and not sleeping or off somewhere else. I'll save that for my students. As Jillian said, I want to talk today about food loss and food waste, the difference between the two. I'll open up with, for those of you who were with us last year, kind of just an update of the current situation for our operation, for our rescue operation, how our numbers have changed through and after the pandemic. I guess we could say after, kind of, sort of. And again, I just want to thank you for asking me back again this year. It's always a pleasure to be with like-minded individuals and also to see other groups that are making the nonprofit journey work. And for those of you who are board members, I can't even put into words the thanks I give to individuals like you who help make these organizations possible. And thanks for helping out your organization, and thanks for giving mine time on your agenda to just bring you up to date for where we're at. Things have changed over the last year and a half, 2 years, and for us, they've changed significantly. So I'll start my presentation here. You should be able to see my PowerPoint, I hope. I'll get over here and hopefully it will work. Okay, the difference between food loss and food waste. Some people say we're getting picky when we dig into this. I initially, in the operation of our service, we really didn't delineate between the two. But then moving forward, we were kind of forced into making this delineation because a lot of funders want to see this delineation. They want to see, are you talking, where in the stream are you actually stepping into the stream? Where are you trying to make a difference? And since a lot of funding comes from the federal government, it's very, very targeted. And therefore, we're starting to try and track these numbers ourselves this summer, experimentally. We haven't in the past, but we'll see if it's possible within our type of an operation, if we can do this. So food loss, now this is where we're looking at production, storage, and processing. What we mean here is that not just the initial point of planting the crop and then there's a drought. planting the crop, but the crop comes in, but then there's a horrible storm. Plant the crop comes in, but then when it's time to harvest, the market is totally collapsed and there's no reason to harvest. So those would all be considered in the food loss sector because it's taking place within that production phase. Well, then what happens if you've got something in storage, such as the grain that was in storage prior to the terrible floods of a couple of years ago, and then all of those grain bins that were destroyed, that is a storage loss. Or if what we've seen, and with a lot of donations when I was at the food bank that we would see, is every now and again we'd get a phone call from a refrigerated truck that was sitting at a truck stop somewhere that their reefer had gone down and everything inside had now traveled 10, 18 hours without any refrigeration. And the receiving store, be it a Walmart, a Costco, whatever, told them they wouldn't take it because it hadn't been refrigerated the entire distance. And so that would end up at the food bank. So that's a storage issue. And then of course, processing. We see a lot of waste in certain types of processing. And if you've ever been through a produce processing facility, such as a dry bean processor, potato processor, apples, what you'll note is that not only in the operation of machines do you get a lot of damage and therefore loss, a lot of the machines themselves are designed in such a way that product will fall off of the processing line onto the floor. And then of course, anything, at least according to the Food and Drug Administration, anything that touches the floor can't be put back into the processing line, and so it is considered lost. So you can have food lost all the way up to the grocery store and at the grocery store. Say a cooler goes down at the grocery store, that's processing waste. At stores that process their produce once it comes in, they cut it themselves and repackage it themselves like Hy-Vees do. That is a processing food loss, not a food waste. Food waste, on the other hand, is what happens when food is determined not to be fit for consumption or it's lost in the actual storage for consumption. So you've already bought it and it's in your house. So this is where it gets tricky sometimes for food waste is, well, if it goes rotten on the shelf at the store, it's food loss. If it goes rotten in your refrigerator, it's waste. And this is just one of those simple, you have to make the cut somewhere. And this is where they decided, they being the government, where that delineation was going to occur. Was it's purchased by a consumer. After that point, it becomes waste if they don't consume it based upon some reason. And so when it comes to food waste, that's going to occur in restaurants, it's going to occur in homes, it's going to occur in institutional facilities, anywhere that the food has been purchased and it's now ready to be processed for consumption by that group or individual. And so as it says here, it's usually an issue of negligence or a conscious decision to throw the food away. And I remember in my youth, prior to being a bit more educated about this, I'd have a pint of strawberries and 2 or 3 and the pint would have mold on them. I'd throw out the whole pint. Whereas, you know, there might have still been 8 or 9 strawberries in there that were perfectly good. And so that's a conscious decision for food waste. So I've wasted it because I let some spoil and I wasted the rest because I threw it away due to that. Within both of those streams, the amount of waste is significant on both sides. Neither side can claim any type of superiority. They both, not quite, but they both almost equal out. Unfortunately, we don't have really great reporting numbers on the food loss size, but it's estimated that that is where the majority of food does not make it into the consumption phase. We believe is in the food loss size, but we don't have numbers to support that really. Hopefully in the future, we might get better about it since we're really starting to. And even at the industrial level, they've only really started focusing on this food loss aspect over about the last 5 years. And it's only made it down to smaller markets and into the individual and into homes for waste. It's only been the last few years. And so that's why the numbers can be a little bit separate when you look at different reports. When we say that on average, the average American is going to waste somewhere around $400 worth of food a year. So that's going to include both produce, dairy, meats, all of that, $400. It is estimated though, and this is where we get these really, really skewed numbers, we say on average $400 per American. There are some studies that crank that all the way up to $640 per American. So half again as much almost. If you want to dig this down into different countries, then you can look at Sub-Saharan Africa, 4 billion a year, China, 32 billion a year. And so these numbers get really, really big when we talk about the baseline of a community or of a state or of a nation's gross domestic product. This is a lot of money. And it's, when we look at just the food itself, that's the food's market value. So that 4 billion in Sub-Saharan Africa, 32 billion in China, somewhere around 40 some billion in the United States. That doesn't include, when we get down here, that doesn't include the water that went into this. It doesn't include the fuel. It doesn't include the time for production. It doesn't include the health impacts of this stuff going into landfills that then can spoil water. It can also, in its, as it decays, of course, it's going to put methane into the atmosphere and increase global warming, pollution. Again, landfills, not only the impact environmentally of the landfills, but the space that the landfills take up, having to take, in many cases, productive farmland out of the production process to use it as a landfill. The last 2 landfills in Lancaster County, both were built on productive farmland. And the reason being because you don't want to move these landfills cost-wise too far away from the communities because that jacks up the price of disposing of the waste from the community, so they keep them fairly close. Well, where around Lancaster County are you really going to go anywhere out of Lincoln 20 to 40 miles and not run into farmland? And so that's another aspect that we have to take into account. And then here in Nebraska itself, one of the largest landfill operations in the entire United States is operated just outside of David City, which, if you're familiar with that region, is prime bottomland corn area. Plus, I also have a very good friend who runs a small produce operation up in that area. So it's very productive land that we see lost. So This has been an issue that really came to a head, and as you're all familiar with this, really came to a head about 5 to 7 years ago is when food waste and food loss really hit the prime time. And it was John Oliver who really brought it to the prime time when he took an entire show of his, an entire half hour was spent on food waste one evening. And the uptick in shows that were then picked up by national and international news, both broadcast and print and internet, and then other networks that did specials, and then the actual documentaries began to roll out. And I could put up a whole list of the documentaries that began to roll out about food waste, specific to different regions of the world, specific to different types of food, specific to different types of industries. All you have to do is Google them. And if you have a special topic that you have an interest, I can almost guarantee you're going to find a video that that interest is targeted by. Specifically for me, it was always looking at food waste in the produce sector, mainly because within the produce sector, the numbers, number one, the numbers show that it's anywhere, again, depending on who you talk to, anywhere between about 20 and 40% of the overall food waste that we see, food waste and food loss. And so it's significant in amount, but then also the reason I focused in on produce was due to the nutritional density of the food that was being lost. It was nutritionally dense and it was healthy. And so having seen hunger close up and personally in my own life, and then seeing it again during my time traveling around for the Med Center, it was like, this is where I need to focus. This is where a change needs to be made. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. There we go.
There's a vast and global scandal behind the journey from plough to plate. Internationally, over 800 million people endure hunger, yet the world wastes at least a third of all the food it produces. Even in the wealthiest nations, millions suffer from food poverty. 1 in 4 Americans say they struggle to afford food. It's deprivation in a sea of plenty. Over 30% of America's food, or $160 billion worth, gets wasted just by grocery stores and their customers. That is more than enough to feed all the world's malnourished people. Growing food demands land, water, fossil fuels, and soil, and its production is the single biggest impact we humans have had on nature. The foundation of our food system is our farms. The tragedy is that some farmers can't sell half of what they've grown due to cosmetic standards dictated by supermarkets. It's a brutal casting session where crooked Kenyan beans and blemished British carrots are all discarded. With blinkered eyes, we fail to see the beauty in these ugly veg. And supermarkets regularly cancel or change orders at the last minute, meaning that food already produced by their suppliers gets dumped. Farmers bear the cost of this waste, though it's not their fault. Supermarkets purposefully create an image of overflowing abundance. A hardwired human response to glut is to buy in excess. This is the marketing strategy that results in us buying more than we need and creating mountains of wasted food. Meanwhile, over-cautious date labels confuse and frighten customers, so they toss out what's still good to eat. Cafes, buffets, and restaurants are all complicit in the allure of excess, overproducing to maintain a full menu round the clock. And they serve customers ever larger portion sizes that are paid for, but often left uneaten. From 1982 to 2002, the average pizza slice grew 70% in calories, and the average chocolate chip cookie quadrupled. We supersize our problems along with the food, as these extra calories use up scarce land, water, and fossil fuels. Food donations from retailers and restaurants are proven ways of redistributing some of this nutritious surplus while it's still fit for consumption. But many businesses still reason that it's cheaper and easier to fill their dumpsters instead. And if you include the food that humans could eat, but instead use to fatten livestock for more dairy and meat, you find that a country like America has indirect access to 4 times as many calories as it needs. Instead of tossing this food, supermarkets, manufacturers, and caterers must be pushed to direct it to charities that feed hungry people. Governments should intervene when powerful retailers cancel orders and dump their food waste on farmers, refusing to pay the bill. And even if it's not fit for human consumption, it can at least be fed to livestock, especially pigs and chickens. Regulations preventing this need to be changed. We should purchase what we need and eat what we purchase, and demand that the powerful companies controlling much of the food system measure and take responsibility for the waste they cause. Governments should use the vast subsidies they offer to incentivize farmers to look after the land in ways that protect the planet, rather than churning out more food to fill our dumpsters and overfill our bellies. And we all need to recognize that food is too precious to waste.
So as we can see, it's an international problem. It's a multi-level problem. And it's a problem that's going to take more than just individuals themselves saving at home. So the percent of food that never makes it to our plates and individuals themselves trying to change anything, as you can see, each of us shares almost the same percent of responsibility, all the way from the farmer to the individual who's consuming it at home, which means it's going to take all of us along this path to make the changes that need to be made. And so, as the video says, we need to put pressure across the board. Now, whether it's possible to make that pressure come from a government type agency, I really, personally, I don't support that approach from the point of view that, and this is a really bad analogy being the topic we're on, I prefer a carrot over a stick, if you will. I think we need to make these changes attractive to the participating groups across the board. And there are countries that have shown this works, and probably the one that is leading is either Britain or France take the lead on actually making it profitable for companies and for farmers and for individuals themselves to actually act on either food loss or act on food waste. So again, the numbers in the United States, roughly 40% of the food that we raise is never eaten. So this is going to be, again, this is all food, not just produce. 30 to 50% of the food that makes it to a supermarket never gets, again, never gets out of the store, if you will. And here's the one that really causes the biggest environmental impact. that food represents the single largest component of what we're throwing into our landfills. And unless, even if it's incinerated, it's going to create greenhouse gases. If it remains in the soil, it creates greenhouse gases. And so not only, again, are we causing environmental damage on the front end, in many ways in the practices and processes we use to grow our food, but then also at the very end when we have to dispose of the food that we don't eat because we grew too much food in the first place. So what are the reasons? Size, condition, volume, market, and labeling. These are the ones that are a problem on the loss side, okay, for food loss. And these are driven by the corporations, by even, when I say corporations, I mean even down to like the mom and pop grocery store, if you will, from the corporate side, but they're also driven in some ways by the government when it comes to the fact that the government, when it comes to labeling, won't intervene where it needs to intervene to change labeling laws. And the most specific one was cited in the video is the whole idea around best by dates, good until dates, freshness dates. There are no FDA rules around those statements. And so a company can place any type of a label they want on there. The only type of food that is actually controlled by the federal government with a freshness date that actually means something is baby formula. That is the only thing on any shelf in any grocery store that the fresh by date is actually federally mandated, studied scientifically, and means something. If you talk to any nutritionist and ask them about what, how do you know which freshness date to follow, the majority that I've talked to have always told me your nose and your tongue. If it smells bad, it's bad. If it tastes bad, it's bad. Beyond that, you can't trust a best by date. Size, condition, and volume. What we're talking about here is what will fit into the packages that the stores want or the distributor wants to distribute. So say that if you've ever seen some of these large Apple boxes, inside the Apple box are these cardboard inserts that the apple's set in. Well, if the apple is too big to fit into that insert for transportation, that apple gets thrown out. Perfectly good apple, nice big apple, but it's too big for shipment and therefore it becomes food loss. Condition, that was the ugly veg that the British like to talk about, the ugly fruit and ugly vegetable movement we see in the United States, that it's blemished in some way. And we grade produce from A to D. And if it's not an A, it's not going to make it on a grocery store shelf. If it's a B, nowadays it can make it into an ugly vegetable shelf, but anything below a B is not going to be accepted by a grocery store. So where does it end up? It ends up being the problem of the farmer of what to do with it because it's not going to be accepted. Volume, we grow way too much. We can't sell it once that the market becomes flooded with a certain type of produce. This happened in Missouri about 8 years ago. There was an overwhelming production of tomatoes in Missouri, and it literally flooded the market. The price plummeted on tomatoes and farmers could not move them. And we ended up seeing hundreds of thousands of pounds of tomatoes being plowed under in Missouri because it didn't pay to harvest them. As we can see here, this is one of our volunteers who's now working for the university. Trying to think of the name of the program she's running. Anyway, we were brought in to harvest a bunch of beets because what happened? Well, as you can tell here, the beets got way too big. And so we came in and harvested, I believe it was somewhere in the vicinity of like about 700, 800 pounds of beets. But when you figure each beet is about 5 pounds. And so those are the reasons that we see mainly food loss. It becomes food waste though, when at home, I open up the refrigerator door, or my daughters are more prone to this, sitting at the dining room table, and one of them will pick up a bottle of dressing and say, Dad, this expired like a year ago. Well, I've come to find that there are enough preservatives in salad dressings that, you know, I'm eating salad dressing that's 2-3 years past its goodbye date, and I'm still moving, okay? Just turned 58. So it's either the preservatives or it's still good after that best by date. So again, trust your nose, trust your tongue. Again, the ugly produce movement. This is one thing that we like to do whenever we harvest apples, strawberries, tomatoes, and potatoes. We always look for heart-shaped ones that we can put into our album of produce from the heart. Yeah, okay, but we do. And again, the farmer can't sell those. And these are just some pictures. Some of you are familiar with them. A lot of our operations. This is brought about by the fact that according to the USDA, once a piece of fruit touches the ground, it can't be processed into anything. It can't become applesauce, it can't become cider. And so this becomes what's called windfall. The wind blows them, they fall. And we normally, during a normal year, with enough volunteers, will bring in anywhere in the vicinity of 10 to 18,000 pounds of apples, usually in the very short season we have to pick them up. And so this is a boon for us, but unfortunately, I don't know if this is fortunate for the producers. It's unfortunate for us that a lot of pressure was placed on the USDA about this rule. And it was changed that if these apples are going to be heat processed in any way, such as in a pasteurization process, that they could go back into the food chain. And so one orchard that we were working with is now doing that. They're turning it into hard cider. And so it's good for the producer. They get more money, but it's really super caught into our numbers and what we have to take to pantries. This hasn't changed much for those of you who saw this 2 years ago. How much do we waste in the United States? We waste 730 professional football stadiums, and Nebraska's football stadium is actually considered professional in size because it now seats over 90,000. And so a football stadium that seats over 90,000 people, we fill up 730 of those a year in the United States. That's enough to feed 2 billion people. That should frighten anyone, okay? In Nebraska, what's that work out to be? Again, these numbers haven't changed. We don't have the pandemic numbers to this level, so we don't know if this graphic has changed over the pandemic. But pre-pandemic, this is the math that went into calculating that In Nebraska, what do we get to? We could fill Memorial Stadium 28 times. So of that 730 stadiums, roughly 30 of those stadiums is Nebraska waste. Why is ours so high? Because we're an agriculturally producing state. We're losing a lot in loss, but we're also losing a lot in just waste side in the post market phase. That's all food. If we break that down for produce, it ends up being about 4 to 7 of those 28 is just fresh, nutritious produce. I won't take the time to show this one. You ever get a chance to watch this, if you never have, watch John Oliver's half hour on food waste. Not only is it super entertaining, but it's also very informative and actually very moving, if you will. So these are our recent numbers. Last time I was with you folks was 2019. We hit 77,000 pounds. That was with 7 farms and 3 farmers market. Then pandemic. We still worked with 2 farmers. All of the farmers markets were closed. Out of those 2 farms, we were able to cobble together 13,000 pounds during the pandemic. This year, we have no farms contracted at this point, and we have 2 farmers markets contracted at this point. Markets have been operating 3 weeks, and we've pulled together about 700 pounds of mainly what you see this time of year, greens. What's happened? Well, what's happened, and I think I put that way too far ahead in my graphics now that I stop and think about it. Again, just some of the pictures from, this would have been operations 3 years ago. Well, what happened during the pandemic? What happened to our numbers? At the very beginning of the pandemic, we all saw this when we turned the news on, massive food waste. We saw farmers, dairy farmers pouring tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of gallons of milk down the drain. We saw pictures like this where farmers were coming in, and even before the produce was ripe, they were plowing the fields under. We've got pictures of post-harvested produce that the farmer would then go back, they'd harvest it, hoping they could sell it. Within 3 or 4 days, they realized they couldn't sell it. They would come back in with a backhoe, dig large trenches, dump all the produce in these trenches, and rebury it. And this occurred across the United States. The reason being twofold: the transportation industry collapsed and the purchasing industry collapsed, mainly the restaurant industry collapsed. And when that happened, there was nowhere for this produce to go. And we can't fault the farmer. We can't fault the trucking companies for this happening. There was nowhere to sell this stuff. Well, finally, after about 2 months of this, the government stepped in and began to purchase all of this produce and all of this dairy, eggs, and a very small amount, but they also began to purchase some meat. And they would then turn around and sell that to, not sell, in most cases, donate that to food banks, mainly through Feeding America was their main conduit. We won't get into the politics of that whole operation, but there were pantries and food banks that weren't affiliated with Feeding America that felt really left out. shall we say, during that whole operation. In hindsight, could the government have done a better job? Yeah. But in hindsight, have they ever had to do something like that before? God, no. Okay. So yes, if in the future we have another horrible pandemic and everything collapses around us, I think we've learned enough that, you know, hopefully there's a nice 3-ring binder on the shelf somewhere that we don't try and reinvent the wheel, and we understand that in many small communities, they're not associated with Feeding America, and they're not getting those phone calls about there's a truck here, or if you drive to this pantry, you can pick up the extra. That caused a bit of an issue in food distribution. But I really have to give kudos to FEMA, to other government agencies, to private groups like the Red Cross that stepped in to distribute this food that was not being sold. And the nice thing about it was that, yeah, the government, taxpayers paid for that food, and it helped keep the farmer alive. It helped keep these distribution companies alive during that interim period where there was nowhere to sell the stuff to. But, and here's the but that concerned us. Again, these were just headlines that happened from the time of the pandemic, from roughly that February, March, all the way up through August, September. And of course, us academics, Dan, us academics were right there. We got our papers started and data collection, and had to prove what worth we seem to think we have. And it was worldwide, of course, but this is where it got interesting. 2 things were happening, and that was that operations like mine were not seeing food waste. Why weren't we seeing food waste or food loss? Because the government was buying everything and anything. They didn't give a darn if it was too big. They didn't care if it was blemished. They were buying food, period. And when a food bank gets a phone call that's not the normal phone call from Feeding America, that was, do you want to, I worked for 3 years at the food bank here in Lincoln, that you would get this phone call that there is a truckload of apples. It's sitting in Denver. Let's start the bidding. And food banks would bid against each other for that truck. And that didn't happen with this. You would get a phone call from Feeding America that said, we've got a truck and it's coming your direction. The food bank in Lincoln actually got to the point where they had to start turning trucks away because they had filled up their coolers. They had filled up their donated coolers from another operation in town. They had nowhere to put the produce that the government was pushing out. Which, when you look at the previous slides, God, if they could only do that during normal times and be able to push those trucks to us in the normal times, because we know the food's there. We know it's going to waste. We know it's being lost pre-pandemic. So why can't we take the pandemic rules and push that stuff out? Hopefully that's going on in discussion somewhere. And so there wasn't food loss or food waste there. That drove a lot of the numbers down. And then on the flip side, in the home, people were home. People knew what was in their refrigerator. They were eating out of their refrigerator every day. They were so bored, they were learning new ways to cook. They were looking up new recipes, and food waste in the homes plummeted. to the extent that in some countries like Italy and Japan, it went down over 80%. I mean, it was so stark. And one of the big hopes is that people have learned something, that maybe it won't be as bad when we, quote, go back to normal. And so things changed at the government level, things changed at the individual level, things changed at the community level. And it's this right here. And I've talked to my donors, I've talked to my farmers, the farms that I've lost, and this is why I lost them. Because the government was buying the produce either directly from the farmer or from the farmer's distributor, but the farmers also learned a new way to reach another set of customers, and another set of customers developed. And the whole CSA, if you talk to the majority of CSA operators in Southeast Nebraska, their business in many cases doubled, if not tripled, and it has not fallen back. And so the farmers I've lost have told me outright, they're like, Mike, we love you, we care about what you do, but we're selling our stuff now. And that's great. I love it. It's amazing. It's wonderful, because it means their operations are going to stay here and they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And the way they do it, as we all know, is the right way to do it. They're doing it in a healthy manner for people. They're doing it in a healthy manner for the environment in 90% of the cases. And I'll leave you with the one comment I did get from a farmer about waste. And he said that he knows for a fact, though, that waste has increased with his customers because they're getting a box every week and they're getting some stuff that maybe they don't like. And since so many people, as we all know, we look at the list of people on our Zoom calls, we go to meetings, we see the same people. My friend, if I'm buying a CSA, chances are my friend's buying a CSA. Chances are, 6 steps of Kevin Bacon away from me are buying a CSA. I've got no one to give that piece of produce to that I don't want, because everybody else got it in the same damn box and they don't know what to do with it either. So we've seen an uptick in waste with people who purchase CSAs, but what they're doing is they're trying to directly donate in many cases. They're taking it directly to a church. They're taking it directly to a small scale pantry. Or now that we're starting to see offices open up, there's going to be the dreaded tomato table, the cucumber table, because they're going to start dumping their stuff there. So is there a future for an operation like mine? I think there is. I think things are going to be, quote, go back to normal in a way that some people will give up the CSAs. A lot of these CSA operations are ramping up in such a way that to stay even with their orders, to stay ahead of their orders, they're going to start producing more. And once they start producing more, at times they're going to have more waste than they used to have. Rules changing as far as such things as this Apple rule. We'll see how that kind of impacts us. I think that the majority of the orchards, at least that we work with, they're not going to put the manpower or equipment purchase power into doing those types of products. They'll just be products that they don't really want to do anyway, and they have no desire to expand that direction. I think that one orchard is probably going to be the only one we lose. And it was fairly small scale anyway of an operation. It's not going to hurt us that bad. Really what hurt us was donations from our consistent donors. And the other thing that really hurt us was, and I do not hold this against my volunteers at all, people didn't want to go out, even if it was to an orchard where you're outdoors. They did not want to be in groups last harvest season. And any phone calls I did get in the harvest season, I wasn't able to act on. I didn't have anybody to do the harvest. And that's another thing that really super drove our numbers down. So will we bounce back this year? It's not going to be pretty. It's going to be another really bad year. But we're reorganizing and got it figured out that we'll survive financially. And we'll just make sure that people know we're still here. And a year from now, I think we'll be in a really good position to jump right back into where we were 2-3 years ago easily. So that's where we're at now. Questions, anyone? Comments? I can figure out how to get out of this share.
Well, thank you so much. As always, it's just a fascinating presentation. I am interested to see more about personal food waste in the home, especially with people moving more towards CSA style boxes. I know you said Japan's food waste has decreased. Are there any kind of studies about American food waste and people who are getting those CSA boxes?
Not CSA directly, but there was a study done, was it, I think it might have been Arizona or Arizona State, did a study on in-home food waste, and they said that initially they were saying it was probably about a 40% decline. So not as good as some of the other countries. And it would be interesting to kind of look at why, but I think it might be because of the other countries that we look at already had a really good foundation on using just about every part of something in the recipes that they have. And so they had that foot up on us of the learning curve.
I wish I were better about it myself personally. I still am guilty of food waste and feel even worse because I should know better. But I think it's very interesting because so I'm at the Society of St. Vincent de Paul Food Pantry right now, and we do still get those Farmers to Families food boxes. And I always wonder how much of that food is being used or wasted, because we also get produce from the food bank. So we're giving out a food box and additional produce, which feels good nutritionally, but I'm still just not sure if folks are able to use what we're giving.
And we tried a very targeted survey down in Tecumseh 2 years ago, I think it was, with the food bank, trying to nail down those numbers of how much of what we give you do you give to someone else, or do you just end up throwing away? And back then it came out, I want to say it came out at around 13% was being redirected or lost in the post-donation phase. But I really think that probably went up with the pandemic because we were flooding. There were a couple of times I went to volunteer at the food bank, and boy, the amount of food we were putting in people's trunks. It was like, and in some ways it was hard to calculate in my head because I was used to, when I worked there, I was putting groceries in somebody's trunk for a month. That was everything they got for the month from us. And so when we were putting in, twice as much for a month, well, then maybe it was still not enough to get them through the month. But when you're in the urban area and people are able to hit 3, 4, 5 food pantries in a 2-week period, then yeah, waste. personally, I think waste probably did go up.
Yeah, and not only that, but also many pantries went from choice to just drive-through
Oh
distribution.
yeah, just this is what you get. Yeah. Yeah, we went totally non-choice at the Lincoln operation. You got what you got.
If I can
Oh, go ahead,
jump
Doc.
in, I would like to have the people who think we have to use genetically modified crops and other kinds of things to feed the world to understand how much waste is there, as you pointed out, that could feed these people with much healthier foods. So I really appreciate the work you've done and the numbers you shared. One number you said, if I recall it or heard it correctly, was you only have an agreement with one of the farmers markets in the metro area this year. Are you looking for others?
I had an issue early on of getting volunteers to come back initially because we were right in the vaccine rollout when it came time to call people and say, are you going to be wanting to help this year? And so we have the one operation on Sunday, the Sunday market in Omaha, Baxter Arena. We have that operation going on, and it's being staffed by students over at the College of St. Mary. And then they distribute from the College of St. Mary from an operation there for the community. And then anything they have left over is supposed to go to St. Vincent de Paul. I don't know if it does, but that's what I'm told. Hopefully it is. And then we have one market here in Lincoln, the Sunday market here in Lincoln. We're hoping to maybe pick up the Thursday market here in Lincoln, but as of last report, they only have, I believe it was 3 farmers there. So it's not going to pay for us to be there, which is a sad thing to say, but just volunteer time wise. The Saturday operation in Omaha really proved iffy the year before last because a lot of the Saturday farmers were Sunday farmers. And so they're going to hang on to their stuff until Sunday to see if they can sell it then. And so we did run the Saturday market in Omaha, but we were only averaging around 350, 400 pounds at the Saturday market. And then we would turn around and we'd get 1,700 pounds on Sunday. So are we looking for more markets? Yeah, we are. If it literally pays for us to be there. And what is my definition of pays to be there? It needs to be at least 200 to 250 pounds. So yeah, that's where we're at market-wise.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ruth. And I remember back in 2019 when you presented at our Earth Day program, there seemed to be state senators that had interest in what you were doing. And I just wanted to know if, and maybe I missed this in the presentation, but if there was anything at the state level, from a legislation point of view to with this.
My 3 senators that I had all went with 3 other bills, whatever they term it, the bill that they pull forward themselves for their focus. Whoa, the heck that was. What they pull forward for their focus bill, and none of the 3 brought forward the property tax break for farmers for donating. None of them brought that forward. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we can see it move forward this next year once the pandemic's not the major focus, and hopefully the focus on property tax relief becomes something more than just,
Yeah.
you know, just the money break. I want
Right.
the money break, but the money break to mean something.
Right.
So yeah, unfortunately, Ruth, it went nowhere.
Mm-hmm. We'll have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, because all three of those senators are term limited this next time around, which means unless they hand off to somebody else that they know will have a passion, we're going to have to start all over again. But at least we had something written up this time that we've got to actually walk in with.
Yeah.
Just have to update the numbers.
Well, it'd be nice. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So if people are interested in volunteering and going to glean produce, should they, is there a sign up link on your website? Should they email you?
Email me. One of our financial savings might be we're going to have to drop our paid website for a free website. So there's going to be a little bit of changing going over that literally in the next 2 weeks. So the email will stay active though and won't change. So yeah, if you're interested, hit the email, and then as things start to pick up, right now we're in the lull. You won't have home gardens. You know, this isn't the time of year for anything outside of greens, and unless your greens are in a cooled hoop house right now, they're being fried. I have no doubt when I get my email later today from our Sunday market person that they're going to say, yeah, there was nothing. I have no doubt it just all burned up this week. And so we really will kick in. I'd say contact me in about the second week of July, because we start getting corn phone calls. So.
Well, I had a ton of fun doing potatoes. So everybody email Mike and let's get corn and potatoes and everything.
Potatoes that's a fun one. I just love the potato one. So, and this year, at least right now, the way it looks this year, I'm only teaching on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which means someone, I don't know who it was, but I found out one nonprofit from Northeast Nebraska got into the field on Friday last year, on Friday afternoon. So if I could get both a Friday and a Saturday this year, that'd be really nice. But it's dirty. It's dirty. And I finally got the fender on the trailer screwed back in again from ripping the fender off the trailer when it got stuck in that dirt. But yeah, never pull an empty trailer into a potato field and then put 4,000 pounds of potatoes into it. That's really stupid. Okay. I proved at that moment I was not a farmer. But yeah, learn the hard way on that one, that soft dirt up around O'Neill, that'll suck a trailer down in no time.
Had a lot of hands to dig it out and move
that
it.
We did. We have one heck of a good workforce to dig it out with though. So.
Oh, well, are there any other questions? We're hitting about an hour here. Well, thank you so much, Mike. What a wonderful presentation. And I'm so sorry that you've experienced so many trials and tribulations throughout the pandemic, but who hasn't?
I was going to say, number one, through the pandemic, we all had them. And number two, anybody who operates in the nonprofit field, you've been through it also. We tighten our belt and we move forward to the next year.
That's right.
So, well, thanks everyone. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Jillian, always good to hear from you, and you too, Michelle.
Great to hear from you. Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. Michelle, I'll let you plug the OPPD meeting.
All right. Thanks again, Mike. It's always disheartening and heartening at the same time to hear from you. So thank you for all of the work you do, and hopefully we can get some more people out with you. Next month, July 11th, we will be hearing from OPPD. I don't have all the details yet. We're playing phone tag, but we're looking at talking about the sustainability generation mix that OPPD is looking to shift to, and kind of tell us about the process they're going through. So if you have questions for OPPD, if you want those answered, if you let me know this week, I can have our presentation tailored to what we want a little bit. So please email those to me at michellef@greenbellevue.org. That's Michelle F@greenbellevue.org. That will also be a Zoom meeting, 1:30 to 3. So after that, we will start looking at in-person meetings again. So if you guys ever have any feedback you want to give us, you can find our website at www.greenbellevue.org. We're also on Facebook, so check us out there. And you can always email any of the board members with our first name, last initial @greenbellevue.org. Thank you again for joining us on this beautiful, warm, sunny afternoon. And we hope you have a fantastic day. We'll see you later.